This is the tragic, legendary story of the Canadian jet, the Avro Arrow. At the end of the Second World War, the West was terrified to discover that the Soviets were starting to develop a fleet of high-altitude, long-range bomber aircraft, many of which would carry nuclear weapons. These new unstoppable aircraft would be able to fly directly over the North Pole and hit targets in Western Europe and North America. Naturally, the West needed a counter-aircraft, a bomber interceptor. These planes would be small, fast, and designed to catch up to their bombers and take them out well before they entered friendly airspace. The US had several aircraft to fill this role, such as the North American F-86D Sabre, followed by the Northrop F-89 Scorpion, and eventually in the late 50s, the Convair F-106 Delta Dart. Canada had effectively taken on a new role as Defender of the North, falling under a flight path of Soviet bombers, and it was about time it had its own aircraft to help protect its airspace. This is what they came up with. The jet would officially be called the CF-105 Arrow, built by Canadian aircraft manufacturer Roe Canada, which is better known today as Avro. It was designed with a crew of two in mind, sitting in tandem with one behind the other. The plane would be 77 feet long, which is 23.8 meters, and a height of 21 feet, which is a bit over 6 meters. The wings would be a delta shape designed for speed and have a wingspan of exactly 50 feet, or 15 meters. It would have had many of the same advantages of the swept wing in terms of transonic and supersonic performance, but offered much more internal room and overall surface area, useful for fuel tanks and more lift when flying at serious speeds. And let's talk about that speed. The aircraft was designed to be deployed fast and catch up to the best the Soviets could throw at the West. It would have a top speed of 1,136 knots, which is 1,307 miles per hour or 2,104 kilometers per hour, with some modifications to push it well into Mach 2 territory. Armament was stored in a large internal bay located in the belly position of the aircraft, taking up over 1/3 of the aircraft fuselage. A wide variety of weapons could be deployed from this bay, such as the Hughes Falcon guided missile, the Velvet Glove air-to-air missile, or 4 general-purpose 1,000-pound bomb. Because of the shape, the front wheel was long and thin and had to fit snugly under the nose, an engineering marvel for the time. The bomber interceptor would have a combat range of 360 nautical miles, around about 670 kilometers. Or if out just on a little patrol, a top range of around 718 nautical miles, which is 1,330 kilometers. Naturally, there were plans to fit the aircraft with additional fuel tanks where needed, but as it was a defense fighter, it wouldn't have to go very far from the airbase, and was considered one of the best, if not the best, bomber interceptor ever designed. But developing a home-built superior bomber interceptor wouldn't be easy. Our story actually begins with a completely different aircraft, the Avro CF-100 Canuck all-weather interceptor. Because the Canuck had a troubled prototype development that led to several delays, the Royal Canadian Air Force realized that they would need to start working on a successor to the Canuck even before it rolled off the production line. In 1952, a year before the Canuck took on military colors, the RCAF issued a special report highlighting the requirements for a new second-generation interceptor called the Air 7-3. This new aircraft would need to carry 2 crew, have twin engines, and a range of at least 300 nautical miles, 556 kilometers for those using metric, for low-speed missions, as well as a short 200 nautical miles range when it was flying at top speed. It would also be able to fly at Mach 1.5 at an altitude of 70,000 feet, and be able to turn at 2 Gs without a loss of speed. All of this within 5 minutes of taking off from a runway as short as 6,000 feet, or 1,830 meters. In May of 1953, Avro submitted the first designs of the Aero. It was radical and included new shoulder-mounted wing design to allow rapid access to the aircraft's internals, weapons bay and engines, and a new design to be more simple and constructed separately, speeding up production. To meet the rapid rollout plans of the Canadian government, as in to have the plane flying by earliest 1955, by 1954, wind tunnel tests had begun. These tests revealed several flaws, such as changing the leading edge of the wing and adding a small dogtooth to the middle of the wing right here to control span-wise airflow at high speeds. The consulting test pilots also complained there was a lack of control feel in the design, but it was around this time that the program was hit by its first major delay. Its selected engine and its backup engine were both cancelled, leaving the plane nothing more than a giant titanium paperweight. The test unit had no fire control systems, as it wasn't yet ready, and thus the weapons bay and other areas like the nose had replaced or been filled by weights to replicate the true feel of the aircraft. But this didn't stop the airframe taking off into the sky on March 25th, 1958, and in a huge sigh of relief, proved no major design flaws. The CF-105 Avro Arrow demonstrated excellent handling and was able to go supersonic on its third flight, breaking records by going over 1,600 kilometers per hour whilst climbing and even hitting a top speed of Mach 1.98, smugly reported as not even realizing its true power. What happens next is one of the most controversial choices ever done in the history of aviation. To put things into perspective, by the end of the development of the Arrow, it was taking up around about 20 to 30% of the entire military budget of Canada. Terrified of a possible missile gap, the new government of Canada in 1957 signed the NORAD Treaty, a combined defense of North America with the USA. Keeping in mind its own interests in the aerospace industry, the US put pressure on Canada to discontinue the Arrow and instead allow it to access the Mach nuclear-tipped anti-aircraft missile instead. And thus, they wouldn't need a bomber interceptor of their own, they would just blow everything out of the sky. But these new nuclear-tipped missiles wouldn't be cheap, and costing a fortune, this would mean that the government would need to choose between the Avro Arrow or the new anti-ballistic missile system from the USA, a part of its treaty with NORAD. On the 11th of August 1958, the government made a move to cancel the Arrow in favour of these new missiles. In a last-ditch effort to save anything of their program, they insisted that the completed prototypes be donated to the Research High-Speed Flight Department of the Canadian government. The government refused, as they lacked the spare parts nor the pilots to use the aircraft if the program was shut down. They even tried to ship one aircraft to England to be used at Boscombe Down, but they didn't get permission. The government swept in, and within 2 months, all aircraft, engines, production machines, and blueprints were completely and utterly destroyed.